Hello there and welcome to this MHA Schools Masterclass on using emotional freedom techniques or EFT to foster emotional resilience in students. My name is Pedro Gondem. I'm Mental Health Academy CEO and your host for this series. And joining me for this masterclass is Professor Peta Stapleton. Peter, how are you today?
I'm well. Thank you, Pedro, and thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure, always a pleasure. It's not our first rodeo together, so I'm really looking forward to these next 2 hours. It's going to be very useful, especially for teachers. For those of you that are joining us for the first time and don't know who Peter is, let's take this opportunity to give you a little introduction. Professor Peta Stapleton is a registered clinical and health psychologist with internationally recognized leader in emerging psychological therapies. Peter has led 22 clinical research trials, and it's likely that number has updated by now, and has developed a reputation for taking a niche area, clinical EFT, and subjecting it to rigorous research trials to contribute to a quality evidence base. This has resulted in profound changes in academic and general community, directly impacted other universities and health department behavior, government policy, treatment programs, and therapist choice of modality. She has published many trials on the use of EFT for academic stress and performance in secondary schools, for teacher burnout, and most recently in primary schools for student wellness. Peter is the pioneer behind Tapping in the Classroom, a universal wellbeing program for teachers on the use of the technique of tapping or EFT with students of all ages in a classroom situation. And that's what we're going to cover a lot today, a lot of practical strategies and techniques. And that program has been attended by over 3,000 teachers worldwide and growing. Peter, anything else about you, about some of your research or practical stuff that you'd like to add that I didn't include?
Thank you, Pedro. No, I think we'll just get right into it and do some hands-on work today and hopefully help all our teachers out there.
Fantastic. So before we start the webinar, let's quickly run through our housekeeping items. This is especially relevant if this is your first webinar in this series. So first thing you'll notice is that you cannot talk during the webinar, but you can use the chat and Q&A tabs to interact with your peers in our team during the presentation and also ask questions. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A segment with Dr. Stapleton where we'll be asking questions you've submitted either during the presentation or towards the end. So if you've got questions, send them away via the Q&A tab. We'll ask them in the end. Thirdly now, the session is being recorded and a link to the recording will be available via the event portal shortly after the conclusion of the live webinar, along with presentation slides and also a special handout. So keep an eye on the event portal, on the emails we sent you with instructions. They all have links to those sections. You'll also see a certificate button via the event portal once the webinar has finalized. You'll already be there if you're watching this on demand in the future. So if you can't see it, right after the webinar, refresh the page. When you click the button, you'll be prompted to complete a short evaluation survey for the session. And once you've submitted that survey, you'll be able to download a PDF copy of the certificate. If you've got any trouble, just email us. Our email is schools@mentalhealthacademy.com.au. If you have any trouble while you're watching this live, just drop a message on the chat. Peter, that's enough of me for now. I'm going to fade away, but I'm looking forward to our Q&A segment at the end.
Amazing. See you then, Pedro. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your interest in EFT, tapping, and certainly how to use that in classroom settings. So let's get into it. There's the beautiful Bond University where I typically spend the other half of my life. So I have been at Bond for nearly 15 years now. So just a little disclaimer to begin with that obviously what we talk about today is very much to be considered an introductory step. You can actually go and learn the EFT tapping technique in more depth. And of course, if you did want to do that, we can let you know how to do that. And because I have become somewhat by accident a bit of a world expert in the technique purely because of our research, I do receive book royalties and fees related to my expertise. So full disclaimer there. And we are talking about obviously a personal change technique today, a stress reduction technique. It is used in therapy, but we just remind everybody it's not a substitute for training as well as actual counselling or therapy. So if you did want any more further information about how to be supported with the technique, just feel free to reach out to Pedro's team or myself directly. All right, so what are we going to cover today? So we're going to have a look at what are emotional freedom techniques, EFT, how does it work, a little bit about the scientific basis. Promise it won't be boring. I've been teaching this for such a long time that we can make research a little bit exciting, so we will do that today. We're going to have a look at how to do the technique, certainly for teachers themselves. Full disclosure, my whole family are teachers or school principals, so I have all of them in my life as well. How to use it in a classroom setting and how obviously it can be applied to certain different conditions. Some of them listed there: bullying, anxiety, depression, behavioural challenges. So let's kick off and get into really what are emotional freedom techniques. So EFT is the acronym that we do use there. Sometimes we call it tapping. So you do hear that a lot, particularly out there just on the internet, social media. I talk about it being psychological acupuncture. So it does use acupuncture points that are known on the body, the face and the body. And because we tap on them with 2 fingers to stimulate the acupuncture point, that's where it got the nickname tapping. That wasn't us. That was a whole US kind of movement that called it that. And sometimes, like I said, I call it psychological acupuncture because we don't use any needles. Now, clinical EFT is the version that we test in clinical trials, not just here in Australia, but worldwide. So there is a certain version, that's the one I'll teach you today in this webinar, which is the version that gets tested. There are lots of hybrids out there of tapping. So if you were to simply Google tapping techniques, you will find lots of different ones, purely because there are lots of acupuncture points in the body, and some other people with backgrounds in those sort of areas may well use additional acupuncture points. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. We just default all the time to the version that has been validated and certainly has got the evidence base. So what is it? It is simply we call it a psychophysiological intervention. It's a stress reduction technique. It basically is a way to reduce stress and reduce stress fast. So we use 2 fingers, we tap on known acupuncture points, we do say what's worrying us. I'll tell you how that actually works in the brain, but all the research points to the fact that it has a very calming effect on areas of the brain such as the amygdala, the stress center, the memory center, and a whole lot of other physiological outcomes. So we have done many studies on cortisol, the stress hormone. Gene expression has been studied in several trials in the US, as well as a range of other physiological biochemistry outcomes. I'll flag some of them today. So I teach a lot of mainstream psychology at master's level in psychology. I guide lots of our graduates once they finish, lots of talk therapy. I've never really come across any other technique that can reduce stress as quickly as this one, and can be used by children as young as 4 years of age by themselves. And like Pedro said, we have actually just finished some primary school trials, so I'll talk a little bit about those today. So if we just talk about what are these acupuncture points, so we'll talk about how to apply it a little bit further on in this session, but these are the points that we use in the trial. So side of the hand is, again, we're just tapping with 2 fingers. So side of the hand is used while we're verbalizing what's going on for us. And of course, you can do that in your mind. You can just think about it. But these are the 8 points. So if I just walk through them, you can tap along with me, or you can certainly just watch me. So the first one is the start of the eyebrow, and we just tap there with 2 fingers. Now, the full technique does involve us verbalizing what's going on, but that's the acupuncture point there. Side of the eye where it dips in, there's an acupuncture point there. So we tap there. Under the eye, so on the bone, under the eye. Under the nose is the next point. The next one is the crease of the chin. Now the collarbone point, so if we come to the end of where our collarbone bone is and just come down about 1 inch, sometimes people like to tap on both of those. So it's about 1 inch under where the collarbones meet in the middle there. So tapping there. The next one is under the arm. Now, if you happen to be wearing a bra, then you will find it's the top bra strap. That's where the acupuncture point is. If you don't happen to be wearing a bra, it is 4 fingers, so about 4 inches from the armpit down. So that's where the acupuncture point is. Now, the last one used in clinical EFT is the center of the head. So I tend to use an open palm there, so it comes up into the middle. You will see some people tapping by beginning at the top of the head and then coming down, finishing under the arm. Perfectly okay. They're the 8 points used in clinical EFT. Why did we begin at the eyebrow back in the day? I've been doing this research for over 20 years now. That's because it used to end under the arm, and that one was added in afterwards. So for us, it was always an additional point because it used to end under the arm. So we always start at the eyebrow. Totally up to you. That is a flexible thing that isn't something to worry about. So just a little bit about the therapy world, just to sort of put this in context, because it is an emerging, and when I say emerging, it takes about 17 or 20 years for a therapy approach to be accepted into mainstream. That research says there's about 600 types of therapy out there. Most of them don't have research behind them. They may have emerged from clinical practice. They may have been around for a very long time and had some adjustments, but there's around 600 versions of types of therapy. So if they don't have research, they're just used out there in clinical practice, and perhaps people, become aware of them through word of mouth or referrals, and whole fields exist out there with certain therapy approaches. But EFT is not only evidence-based, it's in the top 10% of published research of those therapies that do exist. So it kind of gives us a little bit of confidence of where this has come from, particularly if you may have heard of tapping or EFT many, many decades ago. It's certainly now coming into about its 50th year. So it's been around for a very long time. It's not new. Versions of it existed even before EFT. We won't get so much into the history, but this version has been around for at least 50 years now. We've just been testing it for about 20 years, maybe 25 years in the academic fields, which is very cool. So what is it? It borrows from a couple of existing evidence-based, first-class approaches, so cognitive behavioural therapy you may have heard of, and exposure therapy. So that does get used in some of our trauma disorders as well. So it uses elements of that, but it adds to that this body based, so this somatic element. So we talk about that tapping on acupuncture points can supercharge other things that you may actually be doing, even other, different visualizations and things like that. So stress reduction technique uses acupuncture points, and you obviously apply it yourself, and can be used by very young children right through our whole lifespan. Why does it work on so many things? Because if I was to put up a list of here's all the clinical trials, and we are over 200-300 published trials on EFT, why is it working for so many different things? And that center piece here is really that stress plays a role in so many things. And if stress is lowered, so stress could be the way I think about it, the way I feel about it, then I get a whole different perspective. I get decision-making areas of my brain that open up, problem-solving areas. I feel calmer, and therefore I may well get some sort of other outcome. So we've done chronic pain research. I'll show you some brain scans coming up soon, where the pain response in those patients was so diminished they forgot they were actually in our trial 6 months earlier. But all we were doing was targeting, obviously, the stress response. So it could be phobias, it could be learning, it could be, memory. So one of my latest books has been about memory and how to use EFT in those kind of learning processes, because that's what I do on a daily basis. Pain, like I said, different illnesses, a whole range of things. But if we're regulating the stress response in the brain and the body, and we're having an effect on things like cortisol, the stress hormone, then we are going to have a flow-on effect elsewhere. So stress tends to be present in not only emotional concerns, but also physical issues. And we're able to think more clearly, so people may end up making better decisions, problem solving, being able to think of a solution, that type of thing. So lots of research. This is just a little snapshot to sort of show you the pinnacle of research is certainly the ability to do a meta-analysis. So we're not going to get too much into what these are, but it's when there's enough clinical trials that have been published, so this second level, they're really the gold standard in research. So it's when people don't get to choose which treatment they get. They're randomly allocated by a computer, so there's no bias. So actually, we're well over this now, but, you know, more than 70, 75 RCTs. When there's enough of those, you can actually analyse all the data together. So that's a really good thing, because all these different researchers have done different individual trials of the same topic. By analysing it all together, you can actually see, again, without any bias, really what's the true effect. So lots of those have been published. 75 or more outcome studies are just the technique itself. Just EFT might be compared to a wait list, but certainly not compared to an active treatment. Hundreds, actually thousands of clinical case studies. Now, the good news is 99% of these studies indicate effectiveness of EFT for at least one element that they were measuring in those trials. So hundreds of trials, and we've got a 99% effectiveness rate across all different authors, all different universities, and all different conditions. So it's really quite strong, which is exciting. This is one of my papers that I published with a US colleague about 5 years ago now, but we looked at all the physiological measurements that had been done with EFT across a range of different studies, just to have a look at what is it doing. So some of these are subjective, as you can see: anxiety, depression, PTSD, happiness, but things like cortisol. So this is on average across many trials, a reduction there, 37%. Immune system markers was through DNA studies that actually showed there's certain biochemistry markers that we can look at. The immune system is bolstered, can protect you against a range of different things, up to 113% there. Obviously, pain being subjective, blood pressure and food cravings can be quite physiological. That's been my research area for about 15 years, is food cravings and weight loss. So how does it work? So I'm just going to whip through a little bit in case you're curious or have seen this out there. Where are we at? And it has certainly been a big shift. 25 years ago, when this came into my life, we had no explanation whatsoever. It was a hard sell, let me tell you. Conferences, you know, the medical field sort of saying, we don't really know what's happening when we tap on our face. We've come a long way. So I really do want to position where this EFT tapping technique is now. There was, and now this was about 15 years ago, Harvard Medical School in the US did a 10-year research program, and they were looking at acupuncture in the body. They were looking at not only traditional acupuncture points, but stimulation of those. They used functional MRI, lots of other scans, ultrasounds, and they were finding that when an acupuncture point was stimulated, these parts of the brain, so amygdala, stress response, and limbic system, all the emotional response areas in the brain that affect the body, almost instantaneously reduced in arousal. So lots of research, lots published there. Lots of other studies that have been in that imaging field, and I'll show you some fMRI studies today, have found that depending on the words that you say, what you're trying to obviously reduce in your body, or indeed you can actually activate things. So I've run quite a few clinical depression trials over the years with young people. And in that case, we're often trying to reduce the effectiveness of depression, the kind of effects of depression, but we're trying to increase energy. So if we say, yes, sometimes it'll send activating signals to the brain, then for somebody trying to overcome depression, that's quite appropriate. So we can see the brain light up a bit more, not so depressed. And then with other stress, anxiety, and other kind of even chronic pain, we do want to see deactivating signals in the brain. So it depends on the words that we're trying to say, but we're seeing areas of the brain being activated alongside what the patient reports, which is very exciting. So it seems to be that we can either activate or deactivate these areas of the brain. We can see those through functional MRI as well as EEG scans and things like that. And by tapping on an acupuncture point, if you have a look at that third box there is a concept called piezoelectricity, where electricity is activated in the skin there by pressure. So that is happening through the tapping technique. This is carried, and collagen is one of the biggest semiconductors of this signal, and it is carried, and it's in that second box, mechanicosensory transduction. That's the part that's carrying it along the acupuncture system to end up in the brain or to be calming down the rest of the body and things like that. So it's actually quite scientific. So it's made our life a lot easier talking about this type of thing. And part of this journey, and certainly this has gone back to the 1960s, has always been this question mark about acupuncture. Acupuncture itself has had nearly 1,000 clinical trials published on it. But a lot of people found it difficult, certainly decades ago, to sort of accept that this acupuncture system in the body, and the word meridian, may have actually genuinely been a real thing. So there have actually been 66 studies that I'm aware of that have compared acupuncture to a sham acupuncture. So if you ever look at those acupuncture charts that, maybe in a doctor's office or an acupuncturist's office, all the lines running through the body and dots along them being there's an acupuncture point, but there's not one. There's been 66 studies there that have compared either putting a needle into a non-acupuncture area versus one that is known, and the evidence supports the acupuncture over sham. There's actually been those same studies done on EFT as well. So this is where the acupuncture physical research started. So you may well have heard of the meridian being an energetic system through the body. But in the 1960s, there was a professor in North Korea at a university who felt through research that he was doing that the meridian system in the body, the acupuncture system in the body, may not have been energetic. It may have actually been physical. So he did the very first study, anatomical study, and was able to, and these were done on animal models in labs, stain with, things that were available at the time, different tissues and areas of these animals, kind of organs and nerve tissue, and could actually see through microscope that the acupuncture system may well have been physical, and the dye kind of coagulates or condenses on these acupuncture points, but flows freely where there's no acupuncture point. So he published this. These studies are all available. We can certainly give you access to them. They're all freely available to read. But people tried to replicate these studies and couldn't replicate them. So it kind of got shelved, as research can, where people were like, we can't get the same outcomes, so maybe it wasn't true, or maybe the results weren't, as accurate as they thought. So fast forward to about 2002, other researchers, again, all of that imaging equipment was updated, and we had better access to lots of different kind of, ability to look inside the body. So in about 2002, researchers again in North Korea were able to use ultrasound imaging and were able to replicate. There was someone who went, I'm going to go back to Professor Kim's research and see, was he accurate, and was that actually the truth? And turns out that ultrasound images found an 80% correspondence to the acupuncture point in the body's connective tissues. And this is a quote from their journal article. The anatomical relationship of acupuncture points to meridians to connective tissue planes is relevant as acupuncture's mechanism of action. So they basically said, we've found what he found in the 1960s. So this was the early 2000s, which was quite exciting. So fast forward another couple of years, so again, still in the 2000s, more researchers were able to inject tracer dyes into what was known as the acupuncture point, and they found that it was almost 90% correlated with those meridian charts that you see on the walls there. And again, supported the evidence that it is that connective tissue where you can see this. And lo and behold, it's not energetic, it's actually physical. So EFT, so again, remember 50 years ago was when EFT emerged, and that was on the back of other tapping techniques. was described in terms of energy. There was no evidence that anything may have been physical. We didn't know. We've since had all those other studies that have come out, which is very exciting for us. And they've called the meridian system in the literature, so the academic publications, the primovascular system, the PVS there. And they've found it now not only in animal models, but humans. So it was previously unknown, but again, you know, we've only found certain organs in the body in the last decade as well. And it integrates through the full cardiovascular, nervous, immune, and hormonal systems in the body. So it is indeed running through you, and there are coagulations at these density points that are the acupuncture points. And of course, if you tap on them, if you go and have traditional acupuncture, you get an effect above and beyond any of the non-acupuncture areas. So very exciting. So we're trying to get this message out there that it is actually physical. That is why it makes sense then. Why do we see people showing biochemistry outcomes after tapping on these acupuncture points? So I actually, straight out of the journal articles, have some surgery images to show you an acupuncture point inside the body. So these have been done in surgery. Now, some of them are black and white. Some of them are colour. If you are a little bit squirmish, please close your eyes and I will remind you when to open them. I'll tell you if there's a black and white one and if you do want to have a look at them. So just to sort of show you, this one is black and white if you do want to have a look. So if you have a look, you can actually see a very small thread wrapping around sort of a capillary and connective tissue, you know, capillary being one of the smallest vascular. This is even smaller. So you can actually see, if you can see my mouse, where there's a density point like this, that's an acupuncture point versus where there isn't one. So I'll flick to the next one. Now this is surgery slide. So this one is been stained. So you can actually see it being pulled out in surgery and stain coming through it, just so you can see. We'll have a look at this one. Another one, so you can actually see the vascular density here, the acupuncture point. So you can see that it's thicker. And this one just being a fluoro one where you can actually see, you know, these coagulation points of where that dye is showing the acupuncture point. Very cool. Just one last one. All right, you can open your eyes if you do have your eyes closed. So the research has come a very long way, and we have actually in the EFT research world, anyone that talks about this, there's certainly a lot of people out there that use EFT tapping to talk in terms of, you know, the latest research, more so than using words like energy, because certainly that made people glaze over when I started this work 25 years ago, because we truly have a physical vascular system in the body, and it's no wonder that you feel a bit better when you actually do some tapping. So I just want to whip you through a couple of key studies, and then we'll certainly talk about how it can be used in the classroom. This was one of the first cortisol studies that actually was a direct replication study, and was the first to kind of really show it's not about the researcher, it's about the technique. So the very first study in orange here was done by my colleague, Dr. Dawson Church, who did a true triple blind study. Now that means people didn't realize they were in a study. Obviously you get ethical approval for this. The therapist didn't realize what they were doing was part of a research study, and the person analysing the cortisol, the salivary cortisol samples, didn't know what group people were in. So people were randomly allocated to either a resting, so these were people sitting in a waiting room just reading a magazine, a resting condition, psychoeducation where they just learnt about stress, or an EFT session. Now these were all individual, and everybody provided a cortisol sample before and after their hour-long session. So you can see that the resting group, just by sitting, this was done in 2012, sitting in a waiting room, had a 14% reduction in cortisol just over an hour. Very nice to sort of sit and read a magazine. Psychoeducation group that learnt about stress had a 14% reduction, so similar. And the EFT people that tapped for an hour with their therapist on something stressful in their lives had a 24% reduction in cortisol over that hour. Excellent. That study sat there for many years, but had never really been replicated. So in 2019, I replicated that study here in Australia. So again, it was a double blind, because people did know they were coming in for a research group. So a double blind. So they didn't know till the day which group they were allocated to. Certainly our therapists actually knew they were part of a trial, but the scientists who analysed the cortisol studies had no idea who was in which group. We did exactly the same thing, but the only change we made was we did group application. So we had a group that sat and read magazines for an hour. We had a group that learnt about psychoeducation for stress reduction. They just learnt information, but as a group, groups of about 10 people. And we had a group who sat and tapped together, led by a facilitator, on something that was personally stressful to themselves, but they tapped in a group and everybody did their own tapping. So our resting group got worse. So they actually had an increase of 2% in cortisol. Now, we suspected, because we said to them, you're not allowed to look at your mobile phone. So they weren't allowed to sit and scroll. They had to read magazines because we were replicating the study. They actually got worse. So having an hour out may not always help you feel better. Our psychoeducation group was very similar to the individual group 7 years earlier, 19% reduction. And our EFT group almost doubled the effect by doing it in a group. And there is a group effect that does happen in EFT that has been measured. It was actually 43.5% reduction in 1 hour of cortisol. Now, they were the averages. We had a lot of people that had a 65% reduction in cortisol, 58% reduction. It was all very high. So it was very exciting. So that actually was published, our paper, in an American Psychological Association journal, so a top tier journal, and the first time they'd ever published an EFT paper. So that was very exciting for us, and pre the pandemic. So all of that was done. A couple other physiological studies just to sort of show you what's happening here. A 1 hour study was done in the US of tapping for stress, but they looked at, through blood testing, gene expression. So genes can either be upregulated or express, or can be downregulated, and you can affect your gene expression. They found 72 genes changed in their expression, all in a positive way, but some were downregulated, some were upregulated. That's where the immune system expression was really, really high. It had a downregulation effect on cancer-producing genes that were related in cancer. So cancer suppression genes occurred. Lots of things, there's 72 genes. So that was very exciting, only 1 hour. Other studies have looked at gene expression too. So this one down the bottom was a 10 session over 10 weeks EFT program for people with PTSD from the wars, so a combat zone. So it was done in the US with returning soldiers that met post-traumatic stress disorder. And they found 6 genes associated with PTSD as symptoms were downregulated after that 10-week program, and 6 months later were still downregulated. What does that mean? That means if the gene's not expressing itself, then the person, the veteran themselves, didn't report any of those flashbacks, the memory issues, the hypervigilance, nightmares. Obviously, all of those things that we diagnose psychologically match with gene expression. So they were downregulated, and 6 months later, they still didn't meet diagnostic criteria, which was very exciting. Food cravings. Here's some functional MRIs. This is one of my studies, which was done several years ago now and published with the brain scans. So we did functional MRI where our participants were looking at images of high-calorie foods while they were inside the machine. So they're wearing a headset and looking at those to see which parts of the brain activate. So you can see the yellow and red areas there. Those areas of the brain activating are to do with reward and loss and the pleasure center, because they were looking at all lovely images of, ice cream and pizza and cookies and things that they would normally have food cravings. This sample was actually an obese sample that people wanted to lose weight. They then went and had a 4-week intervention. So they got 2 hours a week. So they got 8 hours worth of tapping on food cravings. And in our trials, they do bring the food craving into the group and physically tap with the food in front of them. And then they came back. So they went and did that for 4 weeks. And then they came back and had the same food images shown to them, and there's an absolute absence of any brain activation area looking at those images. We did have a control group. They didn't change at all, unfortunately, because if you don't do much, you still have the cravings. What does that align with? participants were walking out of those functional MRIs and sort of saying, I don't really feel like eating any of those foods, because there's no desire. So if desire is not present in the brain by what you're looking at, you don't feel like eating it. So naturally people lose weight over time as well. So that was our first fMRI study. We've since done a chronic pain study as well. So this was 2022, where our patients lay in the functional MRI machine, and we didn't induce pain. We didn't make them look at images. But what happens in a chronic pain patient is, after years and years, and on average our pain patients had suffered pain for 12 years. So that was the average mean. The brain image, when you look at someone with chronic pain, shows lots of invasion in different areas without even doing anything. So you don't have to, pinch their toe to make pain. So you can actually see areas of the brain in purple. That chronic pain imagery is showing certain areas that are very common in chronic pain patients. So we then sent them away for a 6-week EFT program, so 2 hours a week, 12 hours of tapping on chronic pain. Now, that may have been done on the sensations of pain, what happened to start the pain. Sometimes people had had an injury or an accident and they just had never recovered. Sometimes there was nothing, but there was a stressful time in life. So they tapped on anything personally related to their pain and facilitated. So they had therapists that guided them. And then they came back and had another functional MRI. And so this image here of the little purple in the middle, that actually is reminiscent of a non-chronic pain patient. So their brains looked like somebody that didn't have chronic pain anymore, and they reported the same thing in their psychological measures. So it was very exciting for us, and I remember the neurologist running down the hallway to say it worked, because he was analysing independently, had nothing to do with the trial, the brain images. It also coincided, we did 6-month follow-up. This is all now published. We did 6-month follow-up with these patients. 6 months later, sent them out a survey, said, how you going? Fill out all our questions. And people emailing me back saying, I forgot I was in your trial because I don't have chronic pain anymore. But their brain matched. So we like to say, you can write anything in the survey, but it's really good for us to see what's happening in your brain, what's happening in your body, cortisol, EEG, fMRI, because the brain doesn't lie. And it's really good to show that to patients themselves. So very exciting for us. All right, now I want to flick. So that's just a little bit. There's actually a lot more than that, but just gets us started so that we can do a little bit of tapping. Some school and student research. So again, I'm just giving some highlights here. There's a lot more than this because this has been going for a good couple of decades. We can certainly get you a whole list if you're interested, and there's websites that contain all the research. So some of this we have done and some has been done with colleagues. I'm stepping this through chronologically just to sort of show you. There's been a lot done in university students. So I'll give a nod to some of this. This is my colleague, Dr. Dan Benoit. Now, Dan was a psychiatrist and was really interested in lots of different kind of complementary therapies. And in 2009, we didn't have a lot of research that was supporting. I was only just beginning some of our research at that time, maybe a touch earlier, but he was certainly doing quite a lot in university students. So he looked at, and this was a true randomized clinical trial, he looked at cognitive behavioral therapy, which absolutely is a gold standard, EFT, so clinical EFT, but then a hybrid, and the hybrid was EMDR, the eye movements, and some other kind of, body touch. So certainly we use other sort of areas like rubbing of the arms gets used in some other kind of energy psychology therapies. So he had a bit of a hybrid of EMDR, eye movements, and touch, and then clean EFT. University students who met criteria for test anxiety. So there's measures where you can find out, is it, diagnostically severe enough? So people that genuinely have that, complete overwhelm when they have to sit a test. So these students met that criteria. They were the only ones, and they were randomly allocated to these 3 groups. And then they got any number of sessions until there were outcomes. So if you look at the end of the paper, you actually see that EFT and the hybrid, they called it, and CBT, they all achieved the same outcomes by the end of 5 sessions. So all of the students, when they redid that, test anxiety, and they did a little test, showed that that was significantly reduced, and, they were coping much better. But here's where the difference happened. So yes, similar to a gold standard, but for EFT and which still had the somatic bit, and certainly EMDR as a therapy is a gold standard now for trauma, actually achieved their outcomes in 2 sessions. And this was one of the first papers that actually showed it gets the same outcomes as a gold standard, but it gets it faster. And to me, I'm a little bit impatient. I don't know about you. I like things. I'm like, right, I've become aware of my problem. I want to change it now. So to know that there are techniques that reach the same outcomes as a gold standard, but can actually achieve it maybe in half the time, was quite exciting. So this was one of the first papers. They achieved the outcomes, reduction in test anxiety, students are fine, in 2 sessions, and just maintained it then for the next. So by the end, 5 sessions, they all look like they got the same outcomes, but they actually were able to go on and apply it in other areas of their lives in those extra 3 sessions, which then kind of had a ripple effect, which I think is quite exciting. So Dr. Dan Benoit starting that kind of process. This was the first trial we ran here in Australia. So again, I'm just giving some high level sort of research that showed this was a high school trial. So there was some research in the US, and I'll flag one in a minute, emerging in the gifted student area, where students that were in high academic achieving streams with increased anxiety, perfectionism, were kind of doing some trials in the US. So we actually at the same time were approached locally by a school, 2 schools, who said, we have academically high achieving student streams, and these guys were in year 10 and really struggling. So academically very bright, but underperforming, self-esteem, anxiety, perfectionism, expectations, and there happened to be a school guidance officer that knew a little bit about EFT, and said, could we run a school trial? So we had, in the end, 204 year 10 students. They were all high achieving, met gifted criteria. And we actually got Department of Education approval to run this in school time. And of course, parents consented. So 5 weeks at school, we went to the schools. So these were 2 different schools, and delivered the 75-minute sessions for 5 weeks in a row. What was really curious about the first school that we ran, so they weren't randomly allocated because they were obviously at the schools, was the first 2 weeks of one of the trials. There was a lot of male students. I was personally delivering one of the first trials just to sort of see how this was going to work out. And we were struggling a little bit to actually get through to some of these young boys because, of course, if I'm standing there tapping on my face, they're kind of looking at me like I've got, kind of an extra kind of growth head here going, what is she doing and what is she making us say, that kind of thing. So anyway, I'd gone away after week 2 and sort of said to myself, how am I going to get through to these boys? And so I was just doing a little bit of tapping on myself just to sort of, calm myself down, because I was literally thinking it took us 9 months to get ethical approval. If this trial doesn't work, I'm probably never going to be able to run a school trial again. So I'm like, I was tapping on things like that just to feel centered myself. Anyway, forgot about it, went in for week 3. And I kid you not, I had all these males run up to me, these male students, and they said, Miss, did you watch State of Origin, the football game, the night previous? And I said, no, I didn't. I don't normally watch football. Why? Why are you asking me that? And they said, because the captain of the New South Wales State of Origin team stood on the field during the national anthem tapping. And all these boys had watched it, and I could not believe my luck. And then I went, if Paul Galen is going to do tapping before the State of Origin, then we're prepared to give it a go. So that's my little story that I tell. I have that video of Paul. I have since spoken to his mother. She taught him tapping. She learned tapping a very long time ago, and he has embraced all of that in his football/boxing career. And I do have that video. So it is on, if you just go to Peta Stapleton YouTube, my YouTube channel, I have all the videos there of celebrities and sports stars. There's a Formula 1 driver there that taps. it's very cool to show those. We learnt if we show these videos before we run a school trial, we get buy-in, particularly from the young men. So change the outcomes probably at some level. So what did we find? So 5 weeks, we did 12-month follow-up on these students, 200 students. So we followed them up in year 11, a year later. We had, when I say significant, I mean statistically significant, improvements in fear of failure. That was by and large the biggest thing that they reported was their biggest problem. They were so worried about failing, even though they were academically gifted, that they would underperform to not have someone have such a big expectation. We got a significant improvement there. We got emotional and behavioural difficulties, ratings on that were maintained 12 months later. We also heard from quite a few of the students that they started to apply it to other areas of their life. I had one young man who came up to me. I happened to be over at the school for something else. And he said, I did your tabbing thing. And I've been doing it about, decreasing my anxiety so I can talk to girls. So you never know the wins and the outcomes you're going to get. So that was all published. That's published in the Adolescent Psychiatry Journal, which is very exciting. Of course, we can give you access to all of these. We then went on to another school, again, a high school. These were slightly younger, grade 9 students. The school themselves, again, we got ethical approval. The schools themselves wanted us to address the consumption of soft drinks and poor eating choices. So it was within a stream of sort of physical education that they wanted this delivered. So it was a 6-week program that was done at school. We were very careful. We weren't talking about body image or eating disorders and things like that. But it was more about why didn't they like to eat fruit and veg? And again, we had fruit and veg there. And what was it that was attractive about junk food or soft drink? That kind of thing. So again, we had all those foods with us. So we had 44 students. They were allocated to the group and then a wait list who then got the intervention. 70 minutes every week for 6 weeks. And we looked at things like healthy drinks, unhealthy drinks, foods, self-esteem, self-compassion. So we found that at the end of the program, we did do a 10-week follow-up. That was the end of the school year for this school. The EFT group consumed, compared to the wait list, more healthy drinks. This was all statistically significant. They consumed less unhealthy drinks, soft drinks, lasted 10 weeks later. Less unhealthy foods, junk food, 10 weeks later. Their self-esteem was higher 10 weeks later, and it was higher at the end of the 6 weeks. It was maintained self-compassion by 10 weeks after that 6 weeks, and then it was the end of the year. So we definitely found the significant effects there on that particular topic area for this school. That's published as well, this paper. Compared to the wait list who weren't doing anything, they then went on to get the intervention, but it gives us an ability to look at a group who isn't getting anything. So that was a great study that, again, we did in a school here locally. This was my colleague in the US, Amy Gasser, who is at Brockport University. She was looking at gifted students, and she did functional MRI on these guys as well, where she looked at true RCT, EFT, or cognitive behavioural therapy, and it was for anxiety in gifted students, 10 schools, so you can see the breakdown there. So 63 high ability gifted students, but years 6 to 12. So these guys were 10 to 18, and there was a subgroup that did functional MRI. So the EFT group compared to the CBT group had significant reduction in anxiety when they compared to the wait list. The CBT group, of course, showed a reduction in anxiety, but it was equivalent to what the EFT group had actually achieved, which that's a good thing as far as we're concerned. It's good to have other options outside gold standards, and if a therapy approach is actually, being matched to a gold standard, it just gives people more options. The one thing that keeps showing up, though, is it does achieve it a lot faster. So Amy's got quite a few publications very similar in this area now, functional MRI, book chapters, but programs about gifted students. It's her sort of specialty area. And then one of our most latest trials which is very exciting, is we've been doing a lot. I not only research EFT, but quite a bit in the mindfulness meditation space. We have run quite a few meditation studies, but shifted to primary schools now. So in 2022, we ran a 10-week meditation trial with 920 students in Brisbane, primary school. So 4.5 years through to 12. That was meditation only. Absolute fabulous outcomes. But on the back of that, we had more schools that came to us and said, we want to have this in our school. So again, primary school. So we had 2,500 students go through a Smiling Minds. You might know the Smiling Minds app. So we have partnered with the developers of Smiling Minds. So we used, over again, a 10-week period. And this is daily intervention. So every day, 5-10 minutes, depending on age, they either did, the meditation, or for this group, year one only did tapping videos. So this was the arm. So we had one arm that did Smiling Minds or EFT tapping, and it was only for little 5-year-olds. So that was very exciting. We just looked at 3 weeks for them every day. So they got obviously a video of me. We often use teddy bears, or they just did the school teacher did the app of what we'd told them to play that day. So every day for 3 weeks, and both Smiling Minds and EFT. So we do simplify tapping for little ones. I'll show you that in a minute. Both had outcomes. So every Friday they did the survey on a QR code on their iPads, and we looked at self-regulation and academic achievement. And Smiling Minds and EFT, the meditation, both got the same outcomes. So that paper is under review right now. We'll release it as soon as it, and so is the wider 2,500 student trial just with Smiling Minds meditation. So some great stuff coming out there. But again, a comparison showing that we can get the same outcomes. And I know a lot of schools will use tapping to help settle the body, then go into meditation. So meditation, mindfulness being embraced in lots of our education settings, but a lot of the time tapping can actually help you settle to then go into it, rather than wasting, the first 5 or 10 minutes, even 20 minutes jittering because you're trying to calm yourself down and certainly your mind. Tapping's a great tool to actually settle the body. Some other things that have emerged just in this space. So this is just, like I said, high level, and certainly there's a lot more research than this on schools and education settings. But recently we had the opportunity through some software here at the university to search government policies. This is outside of what you can find on Google, any other search engine. So this software allows us to see where things are mentioned, including people, public researchers. So we looked for clinical EFT, and lo and behold, we found it in 390 government policies around the world, as in people accepting it and using it. But we found this. So I just wanted to flag, because we absolutely are going to give you a copy of it as part of this. UNESCO actually, in part of their 2030 education, so this is the World Health Organization, released in 2022, post the pandemic, a teacher's manual. So for elementary school age students and parents during disaster and emergency, and it was on the back of the pandemic, a manual of psychosocial interventions. Lo and behold, EFT's in there. So EFT is taught through the manual. So we'll give you a copy of that because we're flying the flag of UNESCO. Right. So I want to show you a little bit about tapping, some variations for our little ones, and how we might actually be able to use it. So what is it about? So it is always about these kind of steps. One, being honest about how you feel. So the first thing when people are new to tapping is they'll see a video or hear my kind of demonstration and often say, why am I saying my problem? We just have to remember it's not the problem, it's how you feel. It appears as though it's the negative, but it's not the negative, it's the truth. So if I feel really anxious, I'm going to say that while I do my tapping. So that's just that first step. It's about how do you feel? Second step is, in order to know personally, am I getting any outcome here? Is it actually having any effect? We just use a subjective rating scale. It is 100% subjective. We use it in the clinical trials, but of course we use all our pen and paper measures that we fill out this as well. And we also use physiological measurements. So we could measure heart rate, or we've been measuring vagal tone activity as well, or functional MRI, blood pressure, whatever. So for yourself, just rate it out of 10. 0 is my feeling, whatever's going on for me is nothing. I'm neutral or I'm calm, but 10 is the highest. If you want to have higher than 10, you can, but that's the easiest way to know subjectively. Subjective measurements do line up with objective measures. So we do know it's a very valid way for you to kind of go, is it a 5 out of 10? Is it a 10 out of 10? So just guess the number. Third step, we say our issue. So certainly when you first learn it, say it out loud. Classrooms, say it out loud. But of course you can say it quietly to yourself, driving the car, whatever it might be. And we just keep tapping until we get a shift. So it might be, I went from a 10 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10, good enough, got to go and do something else. Or it might be continue tapping until it is much lower. Sometimes that can take a full session if we're working with a client. Sometimes it can just be to take the edge off, and that is enough for people as well. So whatever outcome you're looking for. Here's the 5 steps. So this is a basic recipe. So 1, we don't tap unless we want something we want to decrease. So we're normally trying to decrease a negative sensation or a thought or something like that, or a pain, whatever. We're not normally increasing. Depression can be an exception to that. So if you look on the internet and you do see positive tapping, that's not true tapping. That's social media, internet tapping. We're trying to decrease something. So it does always look like it's the negative. So what have I got to change? I'm going to rate it out of 10. I'm just guessing what number comes to mind. Just start there. The second step is we say what is happening to us. And when we say that, we actually tap on the side of the hand. So that is that point. So we'll show you this in action in a minute. We say it in a sentence. It's just a formula, makes it nice and easy. For an adult, that might be, even though I've got this stress, even though I'm feeling really worried, I accept that I have this feeling. So it can be you accept yourself, but it can just be I accept this is how I feel right now. It's as simple as that. Next step is we tap through all the points. And when we tap through those, we're normally just saying 1 or 2 words from the sentence just to keep us present. It's a very present, mindful, centered technique. So if I'm tapping on worry, then I'm just going to tap on my worry, this worry. That's all I'm saying. It's just a little reminder phrase. When I get to the top of the head, which is the last point, 1 round of tapping, I just take a breath and I just go, how do I feel now? So we normally rate it out of 10 again, subjective. Tends to be that as you're becoming calmer and more relaxed, you might actually start to feel like yawning. That's a very common outcome of that particular thing that you're tapping on, sort of loosening, if you like. Obviously, if I do 1 round of tapping and I'm still 8 out of 10 and I have time, because it doesn't take very long, then I just keep tapping. I just go back and I keep tapping. So I just keep tapping until I feel there's a shift, or until I'm at a 0, whatever I want to do. So they're the 5 steps. That's as simple as it is. All you're doing is changing the words. So same side of the hand, same 8 points. It's just the word that's different. So it's just whatever you feel at the time. So the most common question I'm asked as an EFT researcher, but also obviously a clinical psychologist, is what words do I say? People say, well, what words do I say when I tap? And I'm like, I don't know. How do you feel? And it's always, well, I feel angry. That's the word. So it's that simple. It's no more complicated. It's just truly, what do you feel? If you can't put a word on the feeling, genuinely, sometimes some people go, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. As long as you're aware of it, and it could be physical in the body, then you can just say this feeling. So I am married to an engineer. He's quite happy for me to tell stories about him. He sometimes can't label the feeling, and I'm like, do you feel it anywhere in your body? He's like, yeah, it's in my chest. It's like, I'm like, this feeling, this feeling. Sometimes the word will come to mind, like the actual feeling. It could be overwhelm. Sometimes it goes away without ever putting a name on it. So as long as you're aware of it, that's enough. Tapping will still work. So here it is put together. So rate your feeling out of 10. So say I've got a headache. I'll just use that one as an example. I've got a headache. Put a rating out of 10 on my headache. I don't know, 6 out of 10. It's just like a bit dull. Then I might say my setup statement, and we typically say it 3 times. There's no magic in that. It's just about getting yourself focused. So sometimes we do it 3 times when we're leading someone in a proper session, purely to see, are we getting the words right? If you know what it is, you can just say it once. So it could be, even though I'm feeling this one's stressed, even though I've got this headache, it's only on the right side, I just accept this is what's happening for me at the moment. So we just get ourselves going, any side. It can be the steering wheel in my car, so sometimes I do that. And then I just come here, and it doesn't have to be hard tapping, it can just be quite light, and I just focus on 1 or 2 words. So if it's stress, I feel really stressed. I feel really stressed. If I feel it in my body, I can add that in. I feel really stressed. I can feel it in my chest. I feel really stressed. It's in my head. If it's my headache, this headache I've got this headache. So all I'm saying is the reminder as I tap through this headache, sorry, under my arm, top of the head, this headache, and then I just stop and I tune in and I'm like, what's happening at the moment? It's funny, I don't really have a headache, but I had a thought that came to mind of probably should drink some water. So sometimes things like that happen where you get a thought of, oh, maybe I'm getting a dull headache because I need to drink some water. But it could be stressed. What is it about this situation I've got to go into? Why am I feeling stressed? Oh, no one will help me. Actually, it's about that. So if sometimes you get other ideas that come up, a bit like peeling the onion. So it might be I'm feeling really stressed about what I have to do at work. But as I tap, I become aware of, I just need some help. No one ever helps me. I can change the words. So you can take it down. And that's often what we're doing when we work with someone individually, is we're taking it down to what's really going on here. So you can see a full round is 8 points, and we just keep tapping. It only takes about 20 seconds to tap. So we could fit a lot in 5 minutes. Basic recipe, just as it is. What's the problem? Tends to be a feeling. It can be a thought, can be a body sensation. Rate it out of 10. Do the setup statement that's on the side of the hand. Tap on the 8 points, short reminder phrase. Take a breath, comfortable breath, re-rate, keep tapping. That's it. So you can tap with both hands, makes no difference, or you can tap with one hand, whatever's up to you. You can swap. Couple of reminders. Why are we saying the negative? Because sometimes students will ask us this, people will ask us, I have a 22-year-old, and she is studying psychology, and she's like, why do we say the negative again? And I'm like, you've grown up with this. So people forget. It's not affirming the problem. You're not implanting your stress, because remember, acupuncture points, sending deactivating signal back to the brain. You're being mindful and aware, and you're honestly acknowledging what is happening. All therapeutic approaches say the first step of change is to acknowledge. Tapping is calming your physiological response. So the amygdala might become quieter. You might feel a bit clearer. The body's calm. Then you're often able to think other solutions to problems. If you tap positive, it's palliative. So a word of warning as far as the internet and social media and things like that, those videos go. That's obviously what people are putting out there to try and attract followers. It's not true EFT. It's like spraying air freshener, but the garbage is still there. So you can tap on, I feel amazing, but if you don't, and there's a reason you don't feel amazing, then it won't last. And it is what gives people the impression that tapping doesn't work. So it is something that because we get people in our clinical trials that goes, I've been tapping online with YouTube for years with this big star, and what are we doing here tapping on our, problem? And it's like, yes, the internet hasn't been great for that kind of thing. So the ending of the setup statement. So a little bit just when sometimes we're using it in classrooms as well. So anyone sort of, 12 years and above does the traditional sort of statement. But if they don't want to say, I accept myself, or they don't, the traditional ending 50 years ago was, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Now, that is very difficult for a lot of people to say because it's unusual. My clinical area is eating disorders. Certainly for a lot of patients with eating disorders, that is not a statement that they could say. The very nature of an eating disorder is about rejection of self. So you can change the end. So the most important part is saying the problem, even though I feel angry. you can say whatever you want at the end. You're just accepting you feel angry. So some other endings. This is where I'm at. This is just how I feel right now. I just accept that I've got this anger going on. I'm doing the best I can. And it's important for younger ones as well that we meet little ones where they're at. So I'm just going to do a demo. So I know I can't see you, but even if you're listening into this, just humor me, go with me. If you can stand up. So stand up where you are at the moment. Make sure you push your chair back if you are at a desk and you're not going to hit your head. I want you to just take a couple of seconds to try to bend over like this person in my image and touch your toes. So you don't have to touch your toes. I just want you to get the sensation of trying to touch your toes. So could you all stand up for me and bend down and touch your toes? And then if you can come back to the chat function, because I do have it open here, I want you to write me just 1 or 2 words only of what you noticed. So it could be a physical sensation in the body. I just want you to give me a couple of words here. So after you don't hang down there too long in case your blood rushes to your head. Come back up. Now, give me a couple of words in the chat function of what it felt like. So sometimes people say things to me like tightness in my legs. So if you've got your chat function open, sometimes it can be other things. So not even close. That's okay. We're going to give this a go. So we're going to just show how stress in the body can be loosened. Give me some words to describe the back of your legs. If you weren't able to put your hands flat, anyone I ever do this with that's a yoga teacher can actually do that. Otherwise, most people can't get down flat hands. So what other words do we have? Tightness in your legs. Sometimes people will say stretch, tight, heavy, fabulous. Thank you for that. Because I'm going to use some of these words in the setup statement. So embarrassing. I'm glad no one can see you. Yes, that's great. Okay, you felt embarrassed. All right. Ouch. Ooh, yes. Pain in the back of the legs. Look at that. Fabulous. Stretch to the limit, maybe. Pressure. Sore hamstrings. Yes. Tight calf muscles. Great. All right. Got some words. So I'm going to say some of those general words. I want you to focus on the ones specific to you. So again, you're just going to copy me. So where you are sitting there, nice and comfortable, no one can hear you. Hopefully you've got the door shut. Repeat after me. Even though I've got this tightness in my legs. So I'll just pause and let you say that out loud or to yourself. I accept this is how I feel. Even though I have this pain and tightness in my legs. I accept this is how I feel. Even though my calf muscles are tight, this pain when I try and touch my toes. I accept this is how my legs feel. All right, now come up to the start of your eyebrow. Let's tap there and let's just say 1 or 2 of these words. This pain, side of the eye, this tightness, under the eye, tight stretchiness, under the nose, this pain, on the crease of the chin, this ouch feeling, under the collarbone there, and you can do both if you want to, so embarrassing, under the arm, pain in the back of my legs, and top of the head, flat hand, tightness in my legs. Now let's just stop for 1 more minute. We will do another round, but often when you're doing physical things, the easiest way to actually test, and even in our pain trials, is we got people to get up and move. Stand up again, no one can see you, and I want you to just try and bend down just the way you did before and just see if there's any difference. So you may have rated it out of 10. I did forget to ask you that, but Just bend over, see if there's any difference. Now that could look like you get a little bit further. That could look like the feeling in the back of your legs is a little bit different. So use the chat function, come back up, don't hang too low there. Come back up, use the chat function. Tell me, is there any difference? Should you stay on one side of the body? Totally up to you, Joan. Sometimes you just get tired and change. All the clinical trials only ever use one side of the body, whatever you prefer, your dominant hand. So it actually doesn't, you don't have to swap. We have all those acupuncture points. It doesn't make any difference. You can do both as well. All right, how did it go coming down? So, oh my God, that is better. So Sue just said, OMG, that is better. I'm guessing meant you got a little bit further down. Now, come with me. Let's do one more. Let's do the other side. So, start of the eyebrow. Tightness in my legs. Let's do another one. Side of the eye. Pain in my legs. Under the eye. This pressure in my legs. Under the nose. All of this tension in my muscles. Crease of the chin. This tightness. Collarbone. Pain and tightness. Under the arm. It's a bit sore. And top of the head. Pain and tightness in my muscles. Take a breath. This is the last time I promise I'll ask you. So push your chair back, stand up. Let's see how you go touching your toes. So bend over again. Give me a comment in the chat function there. Tell me, how is it after 2 rounds of tapping? So we have some people that do this for 10 rounds of tapping, and we're just doing 2. We're just seeing stress in the body. What's happening now? Come back up. Make sure you don't hang down there. What's happening? Is there any difference? So Philip said some more freedom. So maybe in the body. Difference, muscles seem a bit more relaxed, not as tight. Yeah, great. That's excellent. And of course, you can continue that one if you like. It's often a really interesting one to do in groups when you're first introducing topics, because you get such a physical outcome that, yeah, sometimes if you do 5 rounds of tapping, you actually can put your hands on the ground. So much easier, some freedom, closer to your toes, not as tight. Yeah. So I want you to remember this one, particularly next time you feel tension in your neck. So I don't know about you, but I spend most of my time with this one hand on a mouse if I'm not standing teaching, doing computer work. So if this works on tension in the back of your legs, maybe you do want to touch your toes. Imagine doing it on your neck. So imagine, what's this tightness out of 10 you can touch in there? This is such a common technique kind of thing. Give tapping a go on some of the muscle tension in your neck. That actually has a flow-on effect for headaches and things like that. So yeah, there you go. Tapping points, we just did some of that. I want to talk a little bit about, because we are going to open up for some questions, just tapping on the run for teachers. So like Pedro introduced, we do have full, obviously, teacher access to different programs, but this is where our teachers report. It's really helpful. We've had whole schools around the country give all their teachers access, that you can tap on just one acupuncture point. So you can, sometimes people have a favorite. So sometimes, you can rub as well. So you don't actually have to tap. So you can just rub lightly. You can just pick one. So sometimes, like I said, steering wheel, I don't know, if you're in the car by yourself, you can actually do the side of the hand on the steering wheel when you're driving, if you've got an automatic and you don't have to change gears. You can actually tap without words and just focus on breath. So we really like tap and breathe. So we do teach this in schools as well. So it's not necessarily about how do you feel, it's just about regulation. So for little ones, it can just be tapping, comfortable breath. We never say deep breath, we just do comfortable breath. So tapping, taking a breath, tapping, taking a breath. And you can do this in the bathroom. You can literally, if you don't have the ability to shut off the store, duck off to the bathroom and just do a couple of rounds of tap and breathe, and it is a regulation activity. You don't even have to think about or focus on anything that's happening in life. It will help your body relax. So tapping on the run, I think, is hugely effective. Being specific when you are trying to address something is actually really important. So we do ask people to get really, and sometimes you might need a helping hand here, but beware the internet videos that are the positive tapping, because you need to be specific to you. General tapping from a video may not always give you your exact. So if someone's using the word stressed, but for you it's a different word, use your word, even if you're watching a video. If you're too vague, it's very surface tapping and it doesn't actually have an impact. Issues can be like puzzles. So say we are working on stress. Different pieces of the puzzle can have more important kind of elements to them. So some of them are more important to tap on. I'll just give you an example. Here's something that comes up for fear of exams. So lots of our students tapped on this in lots of our things. When you break it down, though, it's not just I have exam anxiety. It's these things. I'm worried about failing. It's the fear of forgetting when I'm in there, even if I've studied. It's perfectionism. What if I don't get 100%? But what does that mean? Pressure, physical sensations, doubt, headaches, whatever it might be. When we tap with students, we tap on all of those individually. We don't lump them all together into the one tapping, because they may all need separate unpacking, because they all have different kind of pieces of the puzzle. So just to sort of, round out, no, I didn't. So if I give you a food craving example of aspects, so if someone comes in, classic, clinical trial, you can probably guess what was the most common food. I did 12 years worth of food craving trials with EFT. What was the food everyone bought into a group? Put in the chat function, chocolate. But if someone comes in and says, I eat all chocolate, I'm like, well, bring the chocolates that are your favorite. But some of them are different. Some of them have nuts in them. Some of them have peppermint in them. Some of them have, crispy bits in them. Some of them are milk chocolate. Some of them are different. So all of them are slightly different. And then all of them have different smell, different taste in the mouth, different texture, different, temperature. Sometimes I like them cold out of the fridge. Sometimes I like them warm. They're all separate tappings. So we don't just tap on this chocolate craving. We actually break them up and we go, the smell of the chocolate. Okay, we just tap on that. And then we go, the taste of the chocolate. What is the taste? Oh, it's creamy. We just tap on that. So a chocolate craving may actually take, 45 minutes, because we're doing them all individually. So I'm just putting that out there so that you're aware of just the elements that we really break it down. Younger students, we say about under 10. So under 10, sometimes you can go a bit higher than that, under 12. We do a simplified version of tapping. So you can see on the image here, it's the same points, but only 4 of them. We tend to use both hands. We don't do setup statement. We just start tapping. So it'll be start of the eyebrow, under the eye. Then we do Tarzan. So we actually do Tarzan on the collarbone point, and then cross the hands over, tap underneath the arms, and we call it hug yourself. So we're still tapping with a flat hand underneath, but it's crossing over and like giving yourself a hug. So start of the eyebrows, under the eyes, Tarzan, hug yourself. And we often use bears. So we have bears with the points on them, and we can tap on the bear and then tap on ourselves. So little ones we do a little bit simple. Exact same effects. Actually works for students who are non-verbal as well. So we have quite a few schools who have non-verbal mutism and things like that, or delayed verbal expression, but they can still tap and they will still get the physiological outcome if they're agitated. So classrooms, what has emerged from our research, but our trainings in this space as well? What have teachers told us? So this is not us telling them, this is where they tell us, this is where we use tapping. Some teachers will use it at the start and or the end of each day. It's just a regulation. Right, everyone come in. It can be actually when they come back from break as well. Everyone's a bit kind of, okay, we've just got to calm down because we've got a maths test. I don't know, NAPLAN's coming up. We've got, ATAR. I've got a grade 12 student in my house at the moment, so she's ATAR. It's like, could be the start of the day if you've got a teacher. That's let's do 4 rounds of tapping only, just everyone calm down. Teachers are telling us they're doing that. They're using it before tests and exams. So they absolutely, even just 5 rounds of tapping, let's just get yourself focused, get your brain back online. We know the research says if you are stressed, generally, you lose about 70% of your blood flow to the frontal lobe, so decision-making center, prefrontal cortex, to go to your extremities. Think fight or flight, freeze or faint, all the stress responses. So if someone's really stressed in an exam, and that could be exam anxiety, but it could just be stress, then they actually find it really hard to access the part in their brain for the answers. So my students absolutely know they can do tapping in an exam situation. So often I'll see them, they'll be like writing, they stop and they start tapping, and then they remember and they come back. So they're just keeping themselves calm. So teachers have told me that they often use them after an exam. So they'll say, how do you think you went? Students spiral. Our lot do it here as well at university level, where they talk to each other after an exam about the answers that they wrote, and they then whip themselves into these situations where they're like, did you write that? Did you write that? And it just kind of unravels. So they'll often, before they let them talk to each other, do a couple of rounds of tapping, just even though I may not have thought I did my best, even though I don't know if I got that answer right, that kind of thing. Classrooms have tapping corners. So whilst they might have sort of chill out zones, then designated tapping corners. They might have bears, puppets in there with the points on them, but students know that they can go over there and do some tapping. They're not to do anything else there except tapping. Specific lessons on different feelings. Even universities are doing that now. We keep getting notice that a couple of our other universities here are using tapping for different kind of things. Disruptive classrooms, so you get whole classrooms tapping. You get a whole group effect the minute you start to tap all together. And then specific issues sometimes could be done at a guidance officer or a school psychologist level, more so than a teacher in a classroom. So they could be around specific things. The one thing that we do get a lot of feedback about with students with neurodivergent conditions or, kind of descriptions, ADHD, ADD, autism, is those students actually say they like tapping because they can do it themselves. So they can actually be in control of it and obviously get an effect there. So bullying issues can be unpacked and things like that as well. So that's where teachers are telling us that they're actually using it. There are a lot of books in this space, so certainly we'll give you some of these links. You can go off and find them. This is only a tiny little section. EFT for Teens I wrote, so that one's actually available. Lots of books there for children, so they're stories, particularly gorilla thumps and bear hugs. So that's gorilla thumps and bear hugs. Stories that you can read that introduce the concept of tapping. Girls, teachers, parents, the science behind tapping is just the science, if you need that. I want to do a couple of FAQs in case they've come up, but then we're going to widen it to all questions. Does it matter which hand you use? No, it literally doesn't matter. Can you switch? Yes. Can you tap with both? Yes. How many times do you tap on each spot? This question comes up. The answer back in the beginning was about 7, but you're not supposed to be counting. I have run an OCD trial where people want to count. You can't count. You've got to say the word. So don't count. But it is about 7. But sometimes people will linger longer, and that's okay. I will follow whoever's in front of me. Do you always need to do this setup statement? No. If you know the feeling, you can just get into it. Young children, we don't tend to do that. We just start tapping. Does it take away natural, healthy, emotional responses? No. I've been tapping for, 25 years now in my life. I'm a fairly regulated person. Do I still feel angry sometimes with my engineering husband? Yes, I do. Does it last as long? No. Do I have tapping if I want it? Yes. So you still get the full spectrum, but you don't get, I guess, long periods of time that you might actually have that feeling if you've been using it a lot. Do you have to believe in it? So definitely people can be skeptical or kind of think that's the weirdest thing. I was that when it first got introduced to me. I'm like, what are you talking about, to my friend? And it was dial-up internet, and I did not have the patience to sit there and wait for a video to load. He did, but I didn't. We've actually done in our studies people that Yeah, because it gets raised, is it a placebo effect that you've got to believe in it and then it works? We've had it with people that are absolutely skeptical. And the easiest way is like a food craving. Because if someone happily eats a food but then does the tapping and then goes, oh my goodness, I have no desire to eat this food and it actually tastes in my mouth, that often tells us that you don't actually have to have belief. We do tap on doubt sometimes in our trials, so we do that. If people doubt, it will work for them. Sometimes in our weight loss trials, people will say, I've tried everything out there. I think tapping works. It just won't work for me to lose weight. So we tap on doubt. Do you use the same process? Yes, you just change the words. It's just, what do you feel? Can you tap on the positive? You can, but we only ever do it after something has been reduced as a number out of 10. That would be quite low. Then you may want to finish with a tapping round that's a bit more positive. So that might be, even though I was stressed, I feel calm now. I believe I'll be okay when I go in to do that presentation. I feel calm now. So you can, but we always recommend that it's not done till after you've cleared whatever was the worry. Why are we tapping with the negative? Because it's the truth. Do you have to say it out loud? No, sometimes it does work faster though. And I can say, because I work with teenagers with eating disorders, we let them swear. May not want to do this in the classroom, but if they're allowed in a therapy room to use swear words, for a teen that's often very impactful, and they can actually really get into it and maybe say words they're not normally allowed to say, but we have to tap at the same time. So they're not allowed to swear without tapping. But yes. All righty. I am going to stop talking at this point because we are going to bring Pedro back. I'm going to have a quick drink and we're going to do some questions.
Thank you so much. That was very, very useful. And for those teachers that are with us right now, teachers or otherwise educators or whatever your role is in the school, thank you for your great questions and participation. Now, I've got a few questions here already that I can get started with, but for those of you that are live with us now, please submit questions you may have and we will try to cover as many as possible. And for those of you that don't recognize, this is the area of Bond University in the Gold Coast.
Yes.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah.
I'm just going to shut down your slides now first. Here we go. Now I'm going to be located as your little angel on the left side of your screen.
Thank you, Pedro.
All right, so the first question is, how can teachers introduce EFT to students who may be initially skeptical or resistant to trying? And if you could provide some case examples of situations where you've had an issue. I mean, you've already talked about those examples of athletes performing it there, which is pretty helpful, but it'd be great to have a variety of different examples of where you found resistance and where the things that worked didn't work as well.
Absolutely. Yes, so we do find that for younger students, they don't tend to question. No one wants to know the science or the research. So little ones, and that could be under 10, we often will just sort of introduce it and say, even like it could be in your own family environment at home. Someone's in a state, they've got something going on, and you just make an invitation. It's like, well, I've come across this thing, and little ones often describe it. We ask them, how do you describe tapping? And they say there's these magic spots on our body, and when you tap on them, you feel better. So sometimes it's worth asking a little one who already taps, how would you describe it? And one of the books that I showed is called Magic Spots because of that. So you can just say to younger students, we're going to try this thing, might make us feel a little bit better and a little bit calmer. Some students will write, and they did write in our trials, they felt sleepy. Now that is a sign of the autonomic nervous system kind of calming down. So often they'll use those words. We're going to try this thing and see if we feel better, and teacher just leads the situation. You're right, teens can be a different story. They've got lots of stuff going on developmentally, but some of that is, I don't want to accept everything someone tells me. So we will often show videos, so we do, and that's why we have built a bit of a collection of them, and they're just on my YouTube. Anyone can use them free of charge, of different athletes. Whoopi Goldberg's there. She talks about fear of flying, whole things like that. So we'll often say, look, we're going to have a look at this technique. It, is a bit, and we're honest, it looks a bit weird, but, there seems to be some athletes using it. It was used in the Olympics Formula One drivers, you know, he's still on Drive to Survive on Netflix, the Formula One driver that's on there. So you can actually see him and they might have watched it. You know, we'll show them other people or whatever, Paul Gallen, the football player, and say, look, they're all using it, so we're going to give it a go. There's one more step or piece of the puzzle, which I always sort of put out there, that when a teacher or a parent or a school leader kind of says, I really want to give this a go, but you're worried. So you're worried about the resistance, or you're worried of how that will be accepted. We always say, why don't you spend 5 or 10 minutes tapping on your own worry about how it will be perceived or accepted? Because we find that the more a parent or a teacher or a school leader does that, the less that they then interact and have that come up. So that's what I was tapping on after the second week of the trial, because I walked away and kind of thought, I'm not getting through to these students. They think this is stupid. I know it works, but I didn't obviously know if someone was going to tap on the football show. But so we always say, don't forget to come back and do tapping on yourself about your worry, that kind of thing. One more thing to sort of throw out there is we actually encourage parents and teachers to do their own tapping, even if it's just the collarbone point, openly, because then people ask you, what are you doing? So my children grew up, because I learned this before, seeing me tap. So then when, I don't know, something happened at school, someone's having a meltdown, do you want to do some tapping? They've seen me. It's not a behind closed doors and a private secret thing. It's open. And it's like they've seen mum stay calm. They've seen the teacher stay calm. So I do know teachers that will just stand in front of the classroom doing this. The class just goes quiet because they're like, what are they doing? I'm trying to stay calm. That kind of thing. So I hope that helps.
That's good. That's good. Do you have any examples of little kids where, you know, for example, my son, I actually have tried to get him to do some tapping. Probably haven't followed the instructions to a T, but it's very hard to get him to stop moving. He's very hyperactive. So have you ever found a specific tapping technique that worked quite well with young children?
Yeah, just pick one point. Don't worry about the whole sequence. So one point only, and collarbone seems to be the one that kind of is easy, and you can do Tarzan and things like that, because then they don't know, but it's active, so they can do that. There's actually videos, and they are freely available to watch, and they're songs, and there's lots of movements, lots of dancing, but they're tapping in the song. And so there's lots of things like that available as tools that for, say, a 4-year-old, you put it on the TV, and it can just be playing, but they're actually doing the tapping, and they're singing and they're dancing, and they might just wander around and go, what's that? I think it's all about exposure in the home environment in those situations as well. Sometimes classrooms will use one of these songs at the start. There's actually 7 songs, 7 days of the week. So the teachers just press play and play it for the start of the day. It goes for like 3 minutes, something like that. So storybooks, that could be end of the day when energy is a little bit lower. So the storybook can be the introduction. It can just be, tapping is brilliant to help kids go to sleep, or with fears and nightmares and things like that as well. And energy, they seem to be slowing down, hopefully, at the end of the day. But I would start, if you've got high energy, like you're talking about, Pedro, with put on a big sing-songy, loud kind of, tapping video.
Do you know any stories about teachers doing some sort of habit stacking with tapping, where, for example, they might do an emotional check-in when they start their classes, and then they double that up with a few minutes of tapping every day, so it just sort of becomes routine and kids don't really question it. It's just part of what they do when they start the class?
Absolutely. So we've got in Australia, there's whole schools that have been trained in tapping. Whether a teacher wants to use it, it's just the school is very supportive. So they've all been trained in tapping, and they will, like tiny habits, BJ Fogg's kind of work, habit stacking, any of those kind of things, where it just becomes then, and we absolutely advocate it. Outside of classrooms, I advocate for brushing of the teeth and tapping, because everyone tells me they brush their teeth. So I'm like, brush your teeth, tap, brush your teeth, tap. So it just gets kind of classical conditioning, gets associated. So yeah, teachers that are kind of, it's just, they're standing outside the classroom waiting to come in, and they're just all tapping. They're just all tapping while they're waiting for the teacher to open the door. It's just the routine. So that classical conditioning and that association absolutely forms a habit. And you do get, we know with tapping from a somatic autonomic point of view, if you tap regularly for a couple of minutes every day, even on just to get tap and breathe, just to get regulated, it has an accumulative effect. So we actually know of teachers that had students like end of primary school that were on the trajectory to become generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis. So it was like they were going to meet criteria here. They started these regular tapping daily kind of habits and fast-tracked tracked them through high school, that kind of thing. None of those students went on to develop any of those diagnoses. So there hasn't been a formalized study of that, but I feel like there was one done like that on CBT where they tried to inoculate those students at risk of generalized anxiety, social phobia, those kind of anxiety disorders, end of primary school, and they tracked them all the way through. And I hate to say it, it was CBT only, and it failed. So the students who went on to do the CBT to inoculate still got the anxiety disorders. The students who weren't even at risk also went on to develop it. So other outside factors obviously impact that. But the feedback I get from teachers is it absolutely appears when there's these individual cases to have an inoculation effect that changes the trajectory of their life.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Colleen's asked how this is used for eating disorders.
Yeah. So this is done more on the
It's here in an hour.
private practice level. So if we're talking binge eating disorder or bulimia nervosa, we absolutely use it to reduce the nature of binges, emotional eating, and of course weight loss might be part of that. So weight loss obviously comes when you don't eat those foods. So we're not looking at that as a short-term outcome, but a longer one. But it absolutely, so I'll give you a classic example. I might have, young ones, that teenagers that come in and they're like overcome with the urge to binge. They might even pre-plan them. And I'm like, you're allowed to have your binge when you go home, because if you ever try and get in the road of someone that's planned to binge, they would literally take you off the streets kind of thing to get through to the binge, because it's part of their coping. And I'm like, you're allowed to, but you have to tap while you eat. So you're allowed to eat whatever you want, but you have to actually tap, or you just have to tap. And it short circuits and interrupts that stress response. So they find that they start to eat less in those binges. And when that is under control a little bit more, we can actually start to use tapping to process what might have perpetuated or precipitated the diagnosis. So that's binge eating bulimia. Anorexia, we tend to use that because they're very anxious, typically young girls, when they're more weight stable. So they may have had hospitalization. We tend to use it more then about their anxiety and what weight means, what their biggest fears and worries are. They're absolutely petrified of becoming overweight. Any family sort of stuff. We tend to use it when they're more weight stable because the brain is back online. When the brain's in a starved state, it's a little bit trickier.
Thank you very much. Some of the most stressful times at schools, I would imagine, it's pre-exam, big exams, end-of-year exams. Do you have some examples of some implementations of EFT during those times as either part of the whole examination week or even before, and how long before that happened? So we're talking about here, let's say a school is not doing this as a regular ongoing thing, but then they might be considering some sort of acute applications in times like that. And with that question, a double up as well. Are there other circumstances like, let's say someone died by suicide in a school, or there's been a natural disaster, or a death of a parent or something like that you could share some examples of how EFT was implemented to help kids deal with that?
I can give you heaps.
Pick like the top 3 or something.
Yeah. So I'll just do the acute bit first. So absolutely, even if a school or a student didn't have a regular tapping practice, even on the day of an exam, if someone was to walk over to them and say, just copy me, just do this. So it's as simple as that. And they might just tap and breathe as an acute. You're about to walk into the exam, but someone's sitting there. it will work. So it will calm them down. Now, the one thing I didn't kind of talk about is we do have what we call discrete tapping. So on the edge of every nail bed, so just where the nail touches the skin, are acupuncture points. So anyone that bites their nails gets a stress reduction. So now we've kind of got a light bulb moment there. But if you squeeze them, you get the same effect. So you get stress reduction. So we say to students, they're sitting there about to get up and give a speech. We just say, just sit there and squeeze them in your lap because you're already feeling stressed. So you get a reduction. In an exam, if you don't want to openly kind of tap, just squeeze. So you can do both fingers. So just squeeze. So discrete tapping can be, but as an acute sort of tap and breathe first aid intervention, you can absolutely use it without ever knowing. And the easiest way is if I see someone, I just walk, everyone knows I do tapping here. I'll just walk up and go, you don't look like you're doing too well. Just follow me. And I'll probably use both hands. Just take a breath. And if someone's really stressed, they'll just follow you. They'll just follow you. Just take a breath. So as an acute, it's obviously really ideal to have more of a bit of a practice. And it could just be, well, my daughter's sitting ATAR. She's got a high goal herself, what she wants to get into. You know, Pedro, she wants to get into medicine. So I'm just throwing it out there. She's like, I've got an exam next week. How do you feel about that? Don't know. Do you want to do tapping? Okay. And we'll just tap for a couple of minutes and then she goes off to do her homework or whatever. So yeah, it can just be that. Let's talk about natural disasters and things like that. We have been, it's a privilege. I feel privileged that we've been able to do this. So in America, there's been quite a few school shootings, as you know. So the Parkland shooting that happened, as well as the earthquakes that happened in Christchurch and the mosque shooting in New Zealand. So you might remember those bits in the news. All of those events, let alone a pandemic, all of those events, we were able to support with people on the ground in those communities to go in and do what we would call emotional first aid tapping, where it's just about coping. So might fit under that critical incident stress debriefing, where we were then able to follow through months and months later by giving online free support to teachers, parents, because we found, everyone might kind of rally, but it's the 6 months later after an event like that where everyone has gone back to their day-to-day, but there's still PTSD responses, grief responses, where everyone's like, in Parkland, I'll give you an example, and we had a therapist over there and she was there for 3 years. She supported the teachers, but also taught them how to use tapping in the classroom. That the classes all went back, and obviously some seats were empty because students were killed, but every classroom had a police officer and a dog, like a big, that set off phobias for some students, but it was different. It was like, oh, we go to school, everyone's back at school now, and it was 6 months ago, but there was something in the classroom that told them it's not safe here. So it was a 3-year support period where for things like that, there are lots of worldwide resources that free of charge will support this in the EFT world. There's also a big movement for veterans that have returned from combat zones, and it's all free. So it's all tapping, and it's a couple other body-based techniques as well, and anyone can access it, frontline workers, free of charge. So I'll make sure that you have all those details to share as well, Pedro. I hope that kind of gives you an example that, yes, it absolutely happens, and we have been able to support that over the last decade when these things unfortunately do happen. And we just had a cyclone here a week ago. A bit unusual for the Gold Coast, but we had a cyclone, but that has affected a lot of people.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. Thanks for that. The next question is, how can teachers monitor the effectiveness of EFT with their students? Are there any specific signs to look for that indicate it's working, or even worksheets or monitoring resources? And I guess with that as well is as a consideration of how important is that for teachers to be able to sell the idea of the school widely using this, as I can imagine a lot of teachers have some creative ideas about how to do things and improve their students, but there might be some bureaucracy to go through and they need to present a case. So what are some of those resources that can support teachers to do that?
Yeah, one, the banker research. So we do have, and I think I've given the URL, which is all the school research that we know has existed worldwide. So sometimes schools want that. Well, show me the effectiveness, show me the outcomes. You do get academic outcomes, so improvements in grades, and we have had schools give us feedback here in Australia that they've tracked the application, as in a consistent practice, to worries about, exams and things like that, or spelling or whatever it might be, primary schools as well as high schools. And they've then spent the year tracking, because they've got the same class, the grades, and have been able to show that the students have actually improved academically. And we've seen that in clinical trials in the US as well, where they've tracked that. Sometimes teachers will just track the emotional temperature of their classroom. And again, if you've got the same class that you stay with for that kind of whole year period, that they just notice the disruptive behaviours, it could be the yelling out in class, it could just be the emotional regulation improves dramatically. And they're not measuring that with, here, fill out my questionnaire. It's just, a classroom that they're walking into that they know 6 months earlier looked totally different. And it doesn't coincide with, I don't know, they've just come back fresh from holidays or things like that. When we did the school trial in Brisbane, we actually were able to look at data of the school behavioural reporting. So when a student gets sent out of the classroom and to the school principal's office or the guidance officer or whoever, because they've been naughty. Remember, this was primary school. And so they had all of and then we ran the trial in term 4. So end of the pointy end, coming into Christmas for Aussies. So for the first 3 years they had, and 3 years and the first 3 terms, they had all the behavioural reporting data. It was pretty consistent, same kids, high rate of, behavioural issues they're dealing with. And then in the term that we ran the trial, it just bottomed out. And we looked back at the previous term 4s of the previous 3 years, and it was consistent with all the other terms. So we saw the effect there. We then said to the teachers, did you notice anything? And they're like, yeah, we didn't have any issues. So it can be that what you find as an educator standing in front of the classroom is we're finding teachers are saying to us they feel happier about going into the classroom. They may not be doing their own tapping on their own stuff at home. They might not need to, but they feel happier. They feel more enthusiastic about what they've chosen as their profession. They feel less burnout. They feel enjoyment, because the class every day is just doing tapping to sort of settle down. But it's having an accumulation effect. So we always say don't underestimate the effect here of, this sort of, building effect of the nervous system just being calmer.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. David's asking if gentle pressure on the points is as effective as tapping.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for asking, David, because I didn't mention it. So in our chronic pain trials, we had a lot of patients with fibromyalgia, which is sore spots, lots of sore spots on the body. And so sometimes tapping is actually a bit agitating. So absolutely, you can just sit and apply pressure. And again, it doesn't have to be hard. And honestly, no one knows how many people sit in a meeting and go like this. And that could be, I've got a headache, but that's an acupressure point. So people can just sit. I see people sitting like this. That's a pressure point. So you can just activate. And as long as in your mind you're still thinking, what am I trying to reduce here, or what's my sensation, it still works. So you don't have to actively tap. And we saw that because we did functional MRIs as well on the pain patients, and saw you don't have to tap. You can just touch.
Very cool. Can EFT be helpful for students with learning disabilities or behavioral issues? How might it support them in managing emotion regulation or stress? And I think when we're talking about behavioral issues here, we talk more about diagnosable stuff, such as ADHD, autism, things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then perhaps provide some of the specific examples of how it's been used and what adaptations may be required from teachers?
Yeah, so again, a lot of this is feedback from the field, so teachers using it in the classrooms, more so than clinical trials being run on these groups, because most trials need about 100 subjects. So, sometimes we're not going to get that in these kind of population groups. So, yeah, teachers are telling us that Absolutely. It could just be used tap and breathe. So that's all we call it, just for regulation, just to sort of settle down. That could be with, maybe ADHD or some of the autism kind of, spectrum disorders, or even, just behavioural sort of regulation activities. So they're using it just to kind of calm down in the classroom. Then if we've got, and it can sometimes be special classes groups get pulled out, like learning circles, or, we don't call them disability, but they might go off and do extra learning in spelling or maths. There's actually, funnily enough, been about 3 clinical trials published, even one just last year that came out, where the clinical trials were done on EFT for mathematics, ability and anxiety and learning. So just mathematics. It must be a big enough problem that people are like applying EFT. So what they're applying it to is any worries and fears. So I feel dumb, I can't get it, it's a jumble. There's been a dyslexia study that's been done as well. So again, when did it start? And then tapping on not being able to kind of understand it, like all the feelings that go with it. That particular study did show that the children were able to start to learn to read again, and the words wouldn't kind of move around, but they were primarily addressing all of their own kind of regulation issues. So some really interesting, curious, my latest book, and not to plug the book, but is about memory and learning, because of what I do. So there is a chapter in that book about how to use it for children learning to spell, keeping them calm while they're learning the times table, when they're talking about, what it is. Both my children would study and then want to tell me out loud what they had learnt and go, quiz me, and write palm cards. So I would just make them tap. So they stayed calm to help it go in, not kind of get anxious. So lots of different applications that have been done, and teachers telling us from the field in that. Normally, those little groups might do a little bit of tapping before they get into, okay, now we're going to read out loud, like therapy dogs are used, for reading and dyslexia. Well, we just add in tapping now as well. So when they're learning to read, we just add in tapping.
Thank you so much. What about EFT to reduce anxiety and stress caused by bullying and social isolation among students? Do you have some case examples or any variation to the technique or the approach?
Yeah, it's the same kind of approach, but you've got 2 arms. So one is the child being bullied. So that is truly just working with, and it might be the school psychologist or guidance officer working with their feelings and their reactions, and what happened and the impact on them. So we're just working through it. How do you feel? Let's tap. The other arm too, though, is the child who does the bullying. So to me, and I can absolutely tell you the research supports this, the child who does the bullying is often being bullied, and they will be being bullied by an adult in their lives. So they need the tapping as much as the child being bullied, because yes, they might be acting out and doing inappropriate things, classroom or otherwise, but chances are they are being bullied, because the research tells us they are, somewhere in their life by an adult, not by another peer. So to recognize it at that level means when they get the tapping about what's happening for them, not just with the child that they might have bullied, but someone else in their lives, the whole bullying stops. So we always remind people to look at both sides there, not just, and sometimes, unfortunately, schools have exclusion policies or whatever about unacceptable behaviour, but that's the bully child is actually the one that probably needs more tapping. And so that we get a whole kind of ripple effect here out there in the rest of their lives and how they're coping and things like that. Exclusion, social anxiety disorders, same kind of thing. But if you've got them, and often this is done much better one-on-one with a student, it's about, what's happening for them. So it is always about, remember that step 1 is what's the feeling, that we're seeking to change here.
Thank you, Peta. The next question, are there any potential challenges or limitations when using EFT with students? And if there are, how can teachers overcome them?
Yeah, probably, just the sweeping statement is, we never recommend teachers be using it like as a therapy tool. It's kind of like don't go where you don't belong sort of thing, because tapping in the classroom sort of style for emotional regulation or just to sort of calm everyone down or before a test is being done for a regulation activity. It's not being done therapeutically to process something that happened in someone's lives. That is much better managed one-on-one and not in a group setting in a classroom, and by someone that's fully trained in the technique. So the reason EFT has an S on the end, so it's emotional freedom techniques, is there's 48 different techniques in this tapping thing, and it is the application there. So my biggest suggestion is that, yep, embrace it in a classroom. You'll have a much calmer classroom. But as far as something's going on for that student at home, there's something there that is not your wheelhouse, then to be doing it therapeutically one-on-one is not appropriate. So that's when a school psychologist might be trained and allowed to use it, or there's a referral person out in the community which we can help with any of that if anyone needs it. I don't ever, even though I'm an absolute expert in EFT, all 48 techniques, my wheelhouse is not in the neurodivergent space. So even if someone wanted to come and see me to help their child or themselves, I'm not the person to do that because I don't have the intricate understanding of those kind of behaviors and things like that. My daughter, who's studying psychology, does. She wants to, so she'll be the go-to person with EFT. But I'm not, because that's not my wheelhouse. So I don't pretend just because I'm an expert in EFT I can do that kind of work.
Thanks, Peta. With regards to cultural aspects and how they correlate with EFT techniques, have you ever come across any specific culturally sensitive or cultural considerations? For example, a cultural background where tapping is kind of inappropriate or feels weird. So any examples that teachers might want to be aware of?
Yeah, not that it's not acceptable. So I am the director of a charity, and the charity itself does psychological first aid in Indigenous communities around Australia. And we've been doing that for 6 years, where it's just EFT and it's for intergenerational trauma and what's happened to the stolen generation. And part of that has been to seek feedback from Indigenous communities. They absolutely embrace it. It fits with all their beliefs and values. I'll give you another example. In Rwanda, in the Congo, we've done a couple of trials with some Swedish researchers where it's been part of our work. And again, has been embraced culturally because they quite like somatic body-based. We've actually even tested, can lay people be trained to teach, like a community leader, be trained in it with no mental health background and be the leader that can teach it, and that absolutely has been shown to work as well. So it doesn't peer-to-peer teaching of tapping. The one thing that a lot of what we have noticed culturally that has been interesting has been that they like to add movement and music and song in some cultures to tapping. So in Rwanda, they actually sing song as groups, and they move, and they prefer to do that. We've tested, did that work, got the same outcomes. So that was actually with a really traumatized group as well. They were child soldiers parents had been killed in the wars, and they'd been trained to be child soldiers and were taken out by the Red Cross. And we went in to teach them tapping to obviously overcome those tragedies. And so they did a lot of singing and wrote us letters, and including they like song, they like music. So it's like kind of an additional bit. So any of the videos we have with music, and I have videos of all of them, it's actually being used in prisons around the world. So we have videos of grown men that are on, in jail because of really quite kind of severe crimes, all tapping, testosterone coming down, coping, jail systems all around the world are embracing tapping as well. I was going to say one thing from your question. Pedro, tell me what the rest of the question was.
I was just around cultural considerations and whether,
A group. Okay. The only group that we have noticed, and this is worldwide, colleagues talking, that sometimes people will go, I don't know if that fits with my own personal belief system. Sometimes we will have, I'll just say Christianity as a group, sometimes people with spiritual beliefs that are religious based, not necessarily just spiritual, sometimes we'll kind of go, I don't know if that fits with my own personal beliefs. So yeah, sometimes that will come up. No one is ever forced to do anything. So
that's when you bring out the video of Jesus tapping, right? That you've got.
I've got Einstein tapping, but but there is this fabulous book written by a Christian colleague, and it's actually called EFT for Christians. And I just recommend that if someone's kind of like wants to be in a clinical trial I'm running, but they're like really grappling, these are more adults, we say, why don't you read Sherry's book? Because she really talks about how it won't conflict with Christianity beliefs and things like that. So that's probably the only thing that may or may not come up in a school. Everybody else, we haven't seen anything else that's been an adverse kind of,
All right, one final question before we wrap up. And you've already sort of touched on this topic in and out a few times, but what role does the teacher's own emotional state play in the effectiveness of EFT in the classroom? Should teachers also practice EFT for their own well-being? That's been established, yes, but what do you have to say with regards to the teacher's own stress levels and their ability to sort of teach or encourage students to practice?
Yeah, look, it's like any relationship, it's never 100% someone's fault and zero your own in any kind of marriage breakup or anything. And it's probably the same in a classroom, and I do come from a whole family of school teachers. So absolutely, I stand in front of 60 master's students, whatever's going on for them is going to have an impact on me and vice versa. So I absolutely think teachers can take personal control of their own stress state, and that could be the classroom, just the nature of the students that came together in that group for that year that was given to you to teach. That can kind of be it. But even if your class won't tap, your class may change based on the fact that you change. So we do see kind of a mirror neuron effect that can occur for teachers, that they might just be applying tapping themselves and the classroom doesn't, yet they still see an outcome there, and they just feel like they can be more centered and regulated and cope better by doing the tapping. I would always say, and I will just throw this out there, that if you want your classroom to do tapping, but you don't do any tapping as a teacher, I think that's a hard sell. I think if you don't do anything yourself, then, it is really hard to say, well, you should do this, but I'm not going to. And I do think the one thing you can do is your own tapping. So, the one way to get your partner to tap is tap on yourself about your feeling that they won't tap, and then they start tapping. I tried that 25 years ago. My husband's like, stupidest thing ever. He's an engineer. I'm like, I'm going to tap on how I feel that he doesn't want to learn tapping. And guess what? Now he taps. So there you go.
Victory is yours.
It's kind of a way to get people to do what you want them to do, but you do have to tell what your own feeling.
Yeah. All right, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate it. Great questions, everybody who asked questions. If you want to access the slides, the handout, everything is in the event portal already, and also you can access certificates. And if you're watching this on demand, you already know that. You've already probably got a copy, but the video recording for those that are live now will be available in the next 5 to 10 minutes. We get it up pretty quickly. We'll see you back here for our next month's session, and on suicide prevention and prevention in schools, a very big, important topic. Peter, have a wonderful day and looking forward to connecting with you soon.
Thanks so much, everybody.